Welcome to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. You can send questions for each show on Twitter using the hashtag IndieBeacon. Now sit back and enjoy learning about our guest for this show.
Welcome to another episode of Indie Beacon Radio. I'm your host, B Alan Bourgeois, and today we have with us M. Ward Leon. Welcome, Mr. Ward, Mr. Leon, Mr. M. Glad you're here. You have an interesting background, as we previously talked about, in reference to being in the agency, the ad agency, the creative agencies and stuff like that. As you call it, the madman time and stuff, which I'm assuming you're dating yourself a little bit there. How did that move you from that perspective to where you are now?
Well, I started out as an art director, and the agency I worked with teamed us up with writers, and we would get together and collaborate and come up with concepts. And I found I had a knack when it came to doing television commercials to do dialogue and plot and concepts at beginning, middle, and end, telling a complete story in 30 seconds. So when I got to the point where I had an idea to write a book, I found that unlike a lot of authors who have a style where they get into a lot of detail on the surroundings and their environment, I found my greatest kind of niche is a lot of dialogue. And it makes for easy reading. I think people find it engaging. And so I found that my advertising background kind of led me to the kind of style of writing that I did for my book.
Now, with that, we also consider that as script writing because it is more dialogue than descriptive aspect and stuff like that. Right. Did you get any feedback from people who said, well, you really need to talk more about this or that? And
actually, I've gotten pretty good feedback, positive feedback. And I think what kind of helps this book being kind of dialogue heavy is that it's pretty action oriented, pretty fast paced moving. And I think putting a lot of detail into the surroundings and to objects and things like that kind of slows the story down. So I think the dialogue kind of keeps the pace kind of fast moving.
Okay. Now it's your book, it's called Blood of the Beast. Mm-hmm. It's quite an interesting concept. First off, what got you to the point of wanting to write something of this nature?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with social media. I was seeing all these stories on the internet and on Facebook and things like that of people posting images of mostly rich white men standing by a beautiful elephant or a lion that they had killed. And it just kind of seemed wrong to me that, to kill something for a selfie just seemed a little outrageous. So the more I saw about these things and heard about poaching and how animal life is being decimated, I just had a feeling that this was a story I had to vent somehow. And I thought that instead of going out and getting in trouble, I'd vent my way by writing a book about people who take action against these sort of poachers and trophy hunters. And it's not about people who hunt for food. The organization that's within the book is okay with that. It's just for people who killed for pleasure or killed to mount an animal's head on the wall.
Yeah, no real value. So.
Exactly.
And they do say that writing is great therapy. Are you feeling much more comfortable now that you've written that?
Well, I was so pent up with anger, I wrote a sequel to it, and that's coming out later next year. But, the more I see of this sort of thing going on, and the less action people are taking to turn this around. I mean, there are only 400,000 elephants left in all of Africa. And they estimate within 5 to 10 years, there won't be an elephant left in Africa that's in the wild. And it's just so infuriating that people allow this. People will kill, in the way they kill these poor animals, And for what? For a tusk, for a piece of ivory? It's just outrageous.
Now, to that point, you flipped the script on this, where the poachers are now the ones that are being extinct.
Exactly.
As you said, the one percenters are now for extinction.
Yes.
So let's face it, I mean, there is some heavy duty murder and mayhem going on.
Sure.
Okay. So how do you feel that is better than the opposite? Or, I mean, how did you struggle with doing that and writing about that?
How do I square that with myself at night?
Sure.
Yeah, it's well, first and foremost, it is a fantasy novel. So I'm not advocating that people go out and do this sort of thing. Again, for me, it was just a way of fantasizing. And if the world was perfect, people wouldn't go out and do this sort of thing, kill for pleasure. But it seems to me that in my book, and maybe in many cases in this world, people don't listen to reason a lot of times, to logic. And so a lot of times the only way to get a story or a message across to really kind of drive the point home that this is unacceptable, there's no excuse for this, and if you do this, if you're, like I say, the characters in the book say, we're willing, the heroes, we're willing to die for what we believe in. You, the poacher, you, the hunter, are you willing to die for what you believe in? And so to kind of really, again, it's really kind of pushing the envelope as far as logic and reality, but that's kind of how I square it with myself. That's how I sleep well at night.
Okay. The name of the group appears to be a French name, so I'm going to let you pronounce it.
Well, the French name, and pardon my French as they say, is Le Grand de la Clé de Sage. And what that translates to is the Monkey Wrench Gang, which is a name of an Edward Abbey book called the Monkey Wrench Gang. And these French, I call them eco-terrorists or eco-warriors, got inspired by Edward Abbey's book, so they've adopted his name for the group. And their trademark is a yellow flag with a skull and cross monkey wrenches underneath it to kind of emulate the pirates symbol. So yeah, it's I'm not. I tell people, they ask you, well, how do you write a book? I know a lot of writers who plot it out. They have outlines and all that. I'm pretty unique in how I go about doing it. I have an idea and I just let it lead me to where I end up. There is no outline. I just kind of let it take me where I want to go. I sometimes have to go back a couple of chapters and add something or amend something like that. But I read the Monkey Wrench Gang by Edward Abbey. It's about 4 unique kind of characters in Arizona who are going up against big oil and land developers and things like that. And so monkey wrench is a literal translation for, throwing a monkey wrench into their plans and things like that. So when I read that book and I had this idea, I had a name, how to come up with a name for something, and it just seemed very appropriate since I was a big Edward Abbey fan, to pay homage to his book.
Now, it's interesting that you had mentioned that these are French characters. What possessed you to do that versus Old English or American or whatever?
Well, I kind of wanted to give it a kind of an international flavor, and in the story, it starts out harmlessly enough, where it's these 2 French brothers whose father is an oil executive, and there was a big scandal, and so to get even with him, or to in the 60s to rebel against the establishment, they came up with this Monkey Wrench Gang. And what happened was, unbeknownst to them, it became this out of control organization that people took it from what it was this passive anti-company, trying to make money over the environment, to this thing that they never thought would ever exist. And it became something so big that they kind of withdrew themselves from it. And within the book, the organization is French, but the people who are in the organization, who are these eco-terrorists, eco-warriors, come from all around the world, from Iceland, from South America, of course. So I wanted to give it type of a truly international flavor.
Okay. They say that you should write what you know. Now, this is clearly way off base from creative design and concepts and stuff.
Yeah.
So how did you pull that information? I assume you did some research.
Yes, thank God for the internet and for Google Maps. What I know that I can apply to this is I'm a big movie buff and read a lot of adventure books. So I took a lot of inspiration from the Indiana Jones and from those type of action adventure movies, even from the 50s Tarzan movies and things like that. So I had this wealth of information and useless knowledge that I had stored over the years and put it to, I guess, good use by writing the book.
Okay. We have just a couple minutes left of this episode or this section, and we'll talk about your follow-up book shortly and stuff. How long has this book been out? It's been a few months.
It came out February 1st, and I have to tell you honestly, for any inspiring writers, and I'm sure other writers will agree with me, is promoting the book is harder than writing the book. Getting on social media, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I got a blog, I joined your organization. I mean, it's nonstop. And, when you're trying to write another book or something like that, you have to parse up your day. So, okay, I'm going to do this amount of time of writing, this amount of time on Facebook. It's tough work. It's not like it is the movies where you write a book, you got an agent, he's running off getting all these movie deals and things. It's like a 9-to-5er. I thought I was going to retire. I'm working harder now than I did when I worked.
And that is also true. And it's sad at the same time because you really do want to be doing the writing, but you've got to be able to get people to buy the book so you can do the writing. So yeah, it is a catch-22 in that respect.
I have to tell you that I found your organization has really been helpful in my, since I am a first-time author, to really kind of help me navigate through the mesh and the maze of being an author. So I really say hats off to you, and I thank you for all your help.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm glad you're remembered. We are at that point where I do need to step away, let our sponsors do their thing. We'll be right back.
What started as a love letter to her son has become an international love letter for all parents to their children. Now you can read acclaimed author Shanalee Charbonneau's story to your children. When her son was very sick, she calmed him by singing her own song to him. She turned that song into the book, My Mama Loves Me, I'm Her Little Boy. She wrote 3 more magical books for all parents and kids 6 and under. Available at Indie Lecter, Amazon, and all local and national outlets.
Hello, I am the author and poet Denise Bryson. I am the author of The Things That Cross My Mind, Love's Reality, both in book and audio form. I am also noted as one of the best poets of 2011. I have 2 new projects coming up. One is the Blinky series, where Blinky tells us all about our coins and our bills for our children. I also have a book coming out called Say Ye. It's quotes from Denise Bryson, just inspirational and that will help you along the way.
Thank you for watching or listening to this show. Indie Lecter is proud to sponsor this programming. As a thank you for listening or watching, we would like to give you a 10% coupon code that you can use on our bookstore at indielecter.store. use coupon code VIDEO19. Again, that's indielector.store, coupon code VIDEO19 for a 10% discount on any purchase. Thank you.
Welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. Don't forget to like us, follow.
Welcome back. This is Indie Beacon Radio, and this is your host, B Alan Bourgeois. We have M. Ward Leon with us. We've been talking about his book, which is quite an interesting flip on the aspect of trophy hunting. It's called Blood of the Beast. It's been out since February of 2019. We definitely encourage you to check it out and see more about it. But earlier you mentioned that you've already written the sequel, so let's hear a little bit about that.
Okay, it's sequel is called Revenge of the Beast, and it has many of the same characters that I have in the first book. Our main character is Vietnam draft dodger who was against the war, and he fled and went to Canada like so many men did. And then when he found that he was being pursued, he went over to France because his uncle was from Montreal and he got to learn French, and so he felt pretty comfortable. He went to France, and even there they were starting to close in on him. So he thought he'd get out of danger, and he joined, of all things, the French Foreign Legion. And he joined that not because they were aggressive, but because they were basically peacekeepers, at least in my story. And so he got the military training that he would use in the book, but he also became sympathetic to the plight of the downtrodden and people like that. And so he was recruited into the Monkey Wrench gang, or the Grand de la Clé de Sage, as it is in French, sort of. And his character continues through. And he has more adventures. He goes up against a lot of different things. Now, a couple of the things he and his team get involved in is a lot of things that's going on in China. They have what they call tiger farms, and the tigers are raised, and there are zoos, but they only keep like 10 or 12 of the most beautiful tigers up front. But in the back, and this is for real, they raise these tigers for banquets. That they actually bring the tiger out, they slaughter the tiger, people eat parts of the tiger, and then the bones, they make a special tiger bone wine, which goes for like $12,000 a bottle, $12,000 a bottle. And so my group goes up against these people, and there's also a thing where they keep these bears, excuse me, in cages, tight cages, and they actually hook up tubes to them to extract their gallbladder bile to make so-called medicine from it. So, I mean, horrendous things like that. And so the more I did research, the more, you would think you'd run out of atrocities against animals, but the list just keeps growing. So the group, the Monkey Wrench gang has no shortage of people to go up against.
And now I can understand more of why you did not totally relax after the first book. You didn't get all your frustration out because of all the research and finding out all these other things. Exactly. Just got you hotter and stuff.
Right.
Now, you've mentioned a couple of time periods. So I'm assuming the books are based more in the 60s, 70s, late 70s, early 80s. Is that correct?
Well, actually, my hero, it starts off in the Vietnam War era, so he's in the 60s. He's like 18 in the 60s. So he's in the his late 60s, early 70s now. So by the time we get towards the end of the book, he's ready to retire the second book. But what he's done is he's trained a whole new generation of fighters who will carry on the tradition. So, I've kind of like brought, which is kind of inspired by, the Indiana Jones things, where early in the stories of Indiana Jones, he's a young, vibrant guy. But later on, he still gets in these adventures. He's not as athletic and all that. He has to use more cunning and wiliness. So that's what happens in these books. he lets the younger people really do the heavy lifting, and he kind of plans and plots and things like that.
So you've ended up with 2 books. Is there a third one?
There is. I have it tucked away. It's basically based on the 2 main characters. One character is called Rodan, and he's the draft dodger. And in the organization, you take pseudonames. So if you ever get captured or anything like that, you don't know anybody's real name. You only know their pseudonym. And the other person who is one of the lead characters is a man from is called the Iceman, because he's really cool and calm and nothing shakes this guy. And so the third book is basically what happens to the 2 main characters. And with all the new things that I hear about going on and things going against the animals, I'm even toying around with a 4th book, but I've kind of gone off to another couple genres that I'm working on now. So it's always it's kind of like the Indiana Jones books. You think he's the last one, but he's coming back for a 5th one, I understand. So.
Okay. And to that question, you brought that up, that you have other genres. I was going to ask, are there other projects or other types of stories you want to be working on?
Yes, in fact, I just signed a contract for another book. It's a detective story. It's about a New York City detective in the 60s, and he works out of Coney Island. I wanted a place where he worked that wasn't overly used, like Manhattan or like the Bronx or Queens. So I picked the Coney Island, and doing research, I found out that they had their fair share of weird stuff going on too. But the thing about my story is the name of it's The Strange and Curious Cases of Roscoe Brown, Detective, NYPD. And the stories, they're not in chapters, they're in cases. So the first case would be, let's say, the case of the Mad Hatter. And so each story is about 30, 40 pages long. And it's the case from the beginning to the end, and how he and his partner solve each case. But each case is a little wacky. They're not your normal police, murders and things like that. They're always a little strange and quirky. So it's kind of a little lighthearted, but very little sex, but a little bit of violence, because that's cop stories,
Right. And it seems appropriate that it's Coney Island, because that's been known because of the Midway and all the other things over the years to be a little weird and crazy.
Yeah, exactly right. Now, I did just finish, and I haven't sent this out to anybody, it's a historical fiction novel, and it's a story of Butch Cassidy and a Sundance Kid, who we know from the movie and real life were actually killed in Bolivia. But what I've done is I've taken the timeline of their lives and I've squished it forward a couple years, and I have them interacting with somebody else who was famous, who was killed in Bolivia, Che Guevara. So Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid keep crisscrossing their lives until that fateful day when Che Guevara was killed and captured in Bolivia. And I didn't know this when I was starting the book, but there was a Nazi war criminal in Bolivia whose name was Klaus Barbie. He was known as the Butcher of Leon. And he claims to have had an integral part in capturing and killing of Che Guevara. So I've taken these timelines and true stories and just kind of squished them all together and made a book out of it. So I found that the hardest one I did, because I was actually taking real life stories and having to work the things together.
Historical fictions are a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, we are at that point where we need to take another break for our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
What would you do if you had to put your life on hold to care for a loved one? I'm Charlotte Kenyon, award-winning author of the book, You Have to Laugh to Keep from Crying, How to Parent Your Parents. That was a question I had to ask myself some 16 years ago, and you'll have to ask the same question. I had a father-in-law with dementia, a mother with Alzheimer's, and a dad with Parkinson, all at the same time.
What would you do if you found out everyone on the town council were thieves and murderers? That's what happened in Bandera, Texas in 1873. John Cruder was the marshal, yet he needed to operate outside the law in order to balance the scales of justice. He is the Midnight Marauder. You can find his books on Amazon.com and TopWesterns.com in paperback, digital, and audio. I'm Roy Clinton, and I hope you'll read The Midnight Marauder.
Welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. Don't forget to like us, follow us, or subscribe to one of our many channels. Now, here is your host for today's show.
And welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. This is your host, B Alan Bourgeois, and I have M. Ward Leon with me. We've been talking about his different books. He's got two that, well, actually one that is currently out called Blood of the Beast. And then his secondary one will be out next year. And then a third, possibly a year or two after that, with a cop detective crime story. And actually, the cop detective crime stories book sounds like it's short stories because each one's a case and it's short and simple. So it's an anthology basically of all these cases that he's worked on. Is that about right?
Yes, very true.
Okay. With that in mind, you seem to be in love or in admiration of the 60s and 70s. Is there a reason for that?
Well, I'm a child of the 60s and 70s. I mean, flower child and all that, hippies, and grew up with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all those guys. So it really kind of formed me who I am. And I don't think, like my wife says, I've actually grown out of that, you know. So I've taken parts that I love of that part of the generation and the experiences that I had back then, and kind of trying to relive them and bring them forward, you know, to share with other people.
Okay. I was always curious about, you know, why somebody would be in a particular range and stuff. How can people learn about you, whether social media or your website?
Well, I have a website. It's dedicated to my current book, Blood of the Beast. It's mwardleon.com. And then I'm on Facebook, M. Ward Leon. I'm on Instagram, and I post a lot of my blog writings on both Facebook and Instagram, and even on Twitter. I'm a little less experienced in Twitter, so I kind of tend to heavy up on Instagram and Facebook. They seem to be a little more visual than Twitter to me. So, yeah, I'm available. Just as a side note, anybody who purchased a book off my website, I donate a percentage of all sales to the World Wildlife Fund. So, you know, I try to do more than just talk the talk. I try to do a little walking too.
Good, and I appreciate that. And I just lost track of what I was going to ask you. So let me ask the other question that we always ask our guests. What words of advice do you have for somebody who wants to get into writing, other than they need to learn marketing?
Yeah. Well, I think the most important thing is be persistent. I send out literally hundreds of queries to agents, to publishers, and I've got hundreds of rejections. And each one of them told me the same thing. This book isn't right for me, but there's somebody out there who this book is right for. You just have to stay with it, believe in yourself, and tell the story that you want to tell. And, you know, you just got to believe in yourself, I think, is the most important thing.
And remember my question, you had mentioned Instagram, and the book that you write has a lot of visual aspects to it. So do you use Instagram to reinforce parts of what you're writing about?
Well, you know, I started out on Instagram and Facebook showing a lot of images of the carnage that people do. But I found after a very short time that that is very, well, depressing, you know. So what I did was I tried to take my advertising background and do some humor to it. Just for example, I did a thing where I used famous people like Edgar Allan Poe, and I put a photograph of my book in front of him like he's reading it, and the headline is something like, "This book will give you something to crow about." You know, so I try to do a little more lighthearted things that people, it's a little more inviting rather than shock, because I think that kind of turns a lot of people off.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. So,
Yeah.
well, we are at the end of the show. I want to thank you very much for being with us, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time, and Blood of the Beast. It's an action adventure, and I think you'll really enjoy it.
Thank you for listening to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. To learn more about Indie Beacon services, to be a guest on the show, or to advertise on our show, please visit our website at indiebeacon.com.